evening. Welcome to River Community Church. My name is Sam. I'm one of the pastors here. Thrilled that you're here on this gorgeous Saturday evening. Kind of wouldn't mind sitting after the service on a little patio with that music playing for the rest of the night. How about you? It sounds pretty good to me. If you're new here, if you haven't been here for a while, you need to know that we're in a series right now called When in Rome, where we're taking one chapter at a time all the way through the book of Romans. We're in chapter 9 tonight. And as we go through these chapters, it's funny. You'll read through them, and whenever I read through them during the week, there's always something that comes to mind, like maybe a picture or an experience that I had or some kind of thing that will always come to mind. And this week, the thing that came to my mind was a wrestling meet. I went to a lot of those growing up. Has anybody gone to a wrestling meet before? Raise your hand. Yes, a few of you have. Well, there's something that happens at wrestling meets, right? Like you go, and you're watching, and it's this really intense situation because there's one person on one side and another person on the other side. It's as pure as it gets, right? It's just two people going at it, trying to see who can pin the other to the ground and win the match. And so it's really intense, right? You have like 6 minutes to do it. And everybody's just laser focused on these two people in the middle of the mat, trying their best to win the match, and they're just going like crazy. But if you ever go to a wrestling match again, I want you to do something for me. I don't want you to watch the wrestlers. I want you to go down to the bottom of the stands and then turn around and watch the people, because there's something that happens, okay? There's something, especially you should find like the parents of the child that's wrestling, the parents, because you'll be blown away. They're sitting there and either like their death grip on their knees, like it's like this, and like they're like doing this thing, like, oh, no, and like just jumping all over the place on the stands. Like literally you can contort your body in all different ways, and like all kinds of crazy things are happening while you're watching this wrestling match. It is hilarious, okay? It is so fun. And what's great about it is if you're in the stands and you're watching, you leave with a workout. Like you leave having done your workout already. You can like check that off for the day. Your blood's risen, like the heart rate's risen really high. You're so good. So has anyone experienced that? Has anybody ever done that in the stands? Yes, okay. I have too, and wrestled, and it's fun to do both. I think it's actually more taxing to be in the stands. But as funny as that is, as comical as it is to think about being in those stands and watching that, I get the sense, as we get into chapter 9, that that's exactly what Paul is doing as he writes this letter to the people of Rome. It says this in Romans 9, 1 through 3. With Christ as my witness, I speak with utter truthfulness. My conscience and the Holy Spirit confirm it. My heart is filled with bitter sorrow and unending grief for my people, my Jewish brothers and sisters. I would be willing to be forever cursed, cut off from Christ, if that would save them. So here Paul is, right? And he's watching from the sidelines. And he's watching, it's like watching someone you care about. And he's watching them, and it's like they're getting trounced by the same wrestling move over and over again. And as you watch that, it can be agonizing. You're twisting and you're turning in your seat. You're wishing that you could do something about it. You're yelling out things that they should do to avoid or to do something different. You just want them to win so badly. You want them to beat this thing. You want them to be okay, but it keeps happening. And Paul, he experiences exactly this. At the end of the chapter, he ends up saying this. He says, but the people of Israel, these Jewish people that he's talking about, that he would be willing to be cut off from Christ for, to see them have something good happen. But these people of Israel who tried so hard to get right with God by keeping the law never succeeded. Why not? Because they were trying to get right with God by keeping the law instead of by trusting in Him. They stumbled over the great rock in their path. So for Paul, as he's watching this, he's seeing them keep stumbling. They continue to stumble and not get the point that he's trying to tell them. They keep getting taken down, for wrestling language. And yet Paul, with every bit of breath that he's got, like a greatly skilled coach, sits on the sidelines and he keeps shouting constantly and continuously, encouraging people to accept this faith in Jesus instead of trip over it, instead of get taken down by it. You know what's amazing about Paul? I mean, I'm fascinated by the guy. What's amazing about Paul is not only do we get to know him through his letters, he wrote a lot of the New Testament, a lot of the letters that are in there are from him, but we also get to see him in action. Like, we really get to see Paul in action. There's this book in the Bible called Acts, or Acts of the Apostles, and it's really the second half of the book of Luke. And so the whole book of Luke, it ends with Jesus dying and being resurrected, and then Acts is actually a continuation of that book. And so it's Luke telling the story of everything that happened after the death and resurrection of Jesus. And when Luke wrote it, what's amazing about this is it was actually often a first-hand account. Is a first-hand account. There were actually several places where he says the word we. We did this. We went there. So here Luke is, he sees it, he hears it, and he writes it down. We get a first-hand picture of Paul in action from this guy named Luke. But what's amazing about this first-hand account is really just how crazy it is. Like, it's mind-boggling, the things that Paul goes through and does. It's crazy. Paul does these insane things. He has these crazy experiences. He was imprisoned. He was beaten. He was stoned to what the people thought was death. And then he went back into town after they had done that, which is nuts. And then he was shipwrecked more than once. The Jewish people who rejected his message did their worst to him, everything they could possibly do, and yet here this guy is, he couldn't stop caring. He couldn't stop trying to convince them, trying to reach them. And so after years of travel, as you're reading through the book of Acts, it's a quick read, but it takes place over the course of years. After years of travel, Paul finally ends up in this place that all of us probably have heard of called Jerusalem. It's kind of like the central place for the religious happenings. And so he's in Jerusalem, and he goes into a temple, and this is kind of what he always does. He goes to where the temple is, and he begins to be in the synagogue of this place, and he starts to teach about Jesus. He says, hey, look at all these Old Testament things, these things that we've learned, and look how it points to Jesus. And so he starts to do this, and people have now heard about Paul. They've heard about all the things that he's doing, and the people there are not very happy about what he's teaching because it's kind of interfering with their influence. So they come in and they say, like, hey, this guy's not doing the right thing, and they stir up this mob against Paul. They stir up this mob, and they end up taking him all the way to the Roman authorities, and they say, we want him executed. We want him gotten rid of. And so they try to do this. They try to get rid of him. They even set it up so that they try and get Paul transferred from one place to another, and they say they're going to jump him in between. Like, they're going to go and jump in there and take care of him, take him out while he's in transit from one place to another. But plot after plot gets foiled. And after time and time of appealing things, Paul eventually, he's a Roman citizen, appeals to Rome. So this means that he's going to head on a boat to see Caesar. But before he's shipped off to Rome, in this account in the book of Acts, he has this crazy encounter. He's got this audience with literally like the most important people in Jerusalem and the surrounding area. He's got this audience in front of him, and he gets to talk to them and tell them some things that he believes. So here this guy is on the edge of his own life. A wrong word could result in his immediate death. And just before he's shipped off to Rome, he gets this audience with the most powerful men in the region. They're the local kings. Listen to what it says. This is like straight out of a movie. Check it out. It says, suddenly, Festus shouted. Oh, not that movie. This one. All right. We can read it along with me without. There we go. We're good. So suddenly, Festus shouted, and this is one of the kings, Paul, you are insane. Too much study has made you crazy. But Paul replied, I am not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is the sober truth, and King Agrippa knows about these things. I speak boldly, for I am sure these events are all familiar to him, for they were not done in the corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. Agrippa interrupted him. Do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly? Paul replied, and I think this is nuts. He says, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that both of you and everyone here in this audience might become the same as I am, except for these chains. So Paul is either clinically nuts or he is impressively certain of his faith, that he's speaking for God, that he knows what's true, So when we read in Romans, when Paul writes of his grief and the extent to which he would go for these people that he cares about to accept Jesus, risking his life with boldness that literally borders on embarrassing or insane, Paul isn't just saying the words. This is how he lives his life. This is who he is. Even when they don't seem to listen. Now, I'm curious. I'm wondering, as you guys sit here this evening, and you're thinking about why you're here maybe, or what you care about, or people you care about, or people that care about you, I'm wondering, do you have someone like that in your life? Someone you would do anything for. You would go to crazy extremes to see them find this faith. Do you have someone like that in your life? Or maybe tonight you're here and you know of someone who it's on the opposite side, right? On someone who on the other side would go to crazy lengths for you, even when you're not listening very well. Who is that for you? Because I think this still happens today. Now, as you're thinking about who that person is, for you, or maybe it's the other direction, I have another question. And that question is this. Have any of you ever tripped on a sidewalk? Yes? A couple of you? Yes? All right. I did like 3 times last week, okay? It literally happened 3 times. I don't know what happened, like jumps out at you and you just miss yourself and you biff, and once in a while you all go all the way down, and it's no fun. But I'm asking that because you know how that happens? Like, it's this craziest thing. Like, it's literally like that big of a crack. It's so small. It's so slight, and yet you hit it. So I was thinking about that this week. Like, why does that happen? What I think happens is I think we get so dead set on what our path is. Like, I know the sidewalk. I've walked it 1,000 times. I don't need to look down. There's no big deal. I'm just not going to trip over anything. You get so used to it, and then all of a sudden, because you think you know, you knock something that's just not even worth knocking over. And you kind of trip up, maybe even fall. You stop paying attention to what's there because you think you know better. You think you know what it is. It's really no different with life, right? We think we've got this thing down. We think we know the path we're supposed to go on, but more often than not, we end up tripping. We end up getting tripped up. This is what we're talking about. We hit what Paul and the Bible call a stumbling block. That's what was happening with these Jewish people. Paul was trying to convince. It's what's happening with them. They believed themselves to be this special people. They're special, right? And they were God's chosen people. In Romans 9:4, Paul talks about them. He says, they are the people of Israel, chosen to be God's adopted children. God revealed his glory to them. He made covenants with them and gave them his law. He gave them the privilege of worshiping him and receiving his wonderful promises. So these Israelites, these Jewish people, here they are, right? And they're set apart and special, but they encounter the stumbling block. They trip on the sidewalk. They mistook their specialness to be who their ancestors were or the family that they were born into, when in reality, what made them special was that they had trusted God's promises. They thought they were special just because of their last name, like you think you're born into a certain family or born into a certain tribe or a part of a certain country or a group of people, and that was what makes you special, but that's not the case. So Paul talks about this, and in verse 8 he says, this means that Abraham's physical descendants are not necessarily children of God. He says that's not what makes it so. Only the children of God, only the children of the promise are considered to be Abraham's children. Now I get it. Like that children of the promise thing, it kind of sounds a little weird. Like children of the corn or something. I was out at the farm, my parents' farm, a couple days yesterday, and one of my boys went into the corn, and I thought, oh no, it's happening. It's not that, it's something different. Stick with me here. Children of the promise, right? And this is what it is. Over and over again, the people that led the way forward for Israel were set apart because they believed God's promises. Abraham believed God's promise that he would be the father of many nations, and it happened. Jacob believed God when he was told that this particular land would be his descendants, and that ended up happening, particularly through a man named Moses, who believed God when he was told that he would lead the people out of slavery and into the promised land. There's promise after promise, and they believed it. With Jesus, God had suddenly delivered on his promise in the most dramatic fashion yet, but they were missing it. They were missing it. It was right in front of their noses, and they were missing it. And by doing so, they were missing what made them God's people in the first place. It says in Romans 9:33, God warned them of this in the scriptures when he said, I am placing a stone in Jerusalem that makes people stumble, a rock that makes them fall, but anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. So Paul is saying, here's this stone. Here's this stone in your path that's been promised. You knew it was coming. God's talked about it. I've just quoted 7 different verses, 7 different things from the Old Testament that point to it. You knew it was promised. You can either trip over it, like God says many of you are going to, or you can embrace it and you can build on it as the cornerstone. And like a coach, right, sitting on the sidelines, shouting encouragement and direction, the wrestler, as they're coaching, will either listen or think they know better and do something else. They'll either think they know better or they'll follow the direction. When people wrestle with their faith, when they're trying to figure it out, those are the same 2 possibilities for us. You can either have a hard heart toward it, think you know better, or you can soften to it, think the coach might know a thing or two, and start following Jesus. The point to take home is this: we're on the sidelines of each other's lives. We're able to cheer each other on, hopefully giving tips and encouragement along the way, hopefully helping other people experience this life-changing faith that Jesus offers, hopefully doing that, but ultimately, at the end of the day, each and every one of us are wrestling this thing out with God personally. It's between each person and God. I mean, I can't decide for you. I wish I could. It'd be fun. I think it'd make your lives really good, and I think a lot of lives that would be improved if I could just decide, right? I think I know better sometimes, right? But only God can soften a heart, and that person has to be open to God in order for him to do so. God's not forcing himself on anyone. If you're here tonight, and you've struggled to be completely in about this whole faith thing, yeah, I kind of like it. I kind of like being a Christian. I kind of like the things Jesus says, but I'm not totally sure. I'm not totally sold out. If that's you, if that's where you're at tonight, let me ask you a question. What's your stumbling block? What's the crack in the sidewalk that keeps tripping you up? And I want to make sure you know, this is not a talk about sin. This is not something that you do that you got to work through with God. That's not what I'm talking about. This is something more than that. I'm talking about the part of faith in Jesus that keeps you from being all in. What is it? Is it forgiveness? Like this whole idea that you actually have to forgive everybody? Like that Jesus commands you to forgive? Is that too much? Because I get it. It's hard sometimes. Is it pain? The question of how a loving God could exist when there's pain in the world and struggle in the world, how is that possible? That's hard to reconcile. Is it believing in something you can't see because you'd love to be able to measure it and quantify it and figure out and touch it with your hands and see it with your eyes? That maybe is a thing for you. Is it faith and works and this idea that you feel like you have to earn it? It's too good to be free, maybe you think. And so I've got to earn my keep. I've got to earn it. Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe it's the Bible, right? How do we know if we can trust this book? It's just hard. It's hard to know. There's all kinds of things that could be stumbling blocks, these things that make up our faith and how we live and how we grow. These are things that we have to embrace as Christians. And in order to do that, it's hard, so there can be stumbling blocks. And to be really honest with you, I've struggled with all of these. I know I'm a pastor, so maybe I'm not supposed to say that. Shh, don't tell anyone. But I have. It's true. But that leads us to another question. I want to go back to the wrestling thing for a moment. The question is this: do you know how to stop a move in wrestling that you keep on having happen to you? Like, they just keep on getting you, and it just happens over and over and over again. You're trying to stop it, you're trying to prevent it, but it just keeps getting you. For me, one of the ways that I feel like I found back when I was doing it that helped you prevent those moves was maybe a little bit counter-thoughtful or to counter what you would think. It was actually, the best way was to learn the ins and outs of that move for yourself. Like, to really understand it, to really get that move. And what that would do is actually two things. Number one is you can start to anticipate it coming because you know how to do that move now. And because you know it, you are starting to be in their minds like, oh, this would be a good time that I would do that move. They're probably going to do it too, so I can start to anticipate it. I can start to know it's coming. So it does that for you. It allows you to anticipate and then prevent the move from happening. But it does another thing also. You suddenly have a new move for yourself. You suddenly have a new move that you get to do. So this stumbling block, right, that we're talking about. The stone we know as Jesus, and as Paul is talking about him as Jesus. If it trips you up, if it's something you don't quite get, if you've been frustrated by people telling you should check it out or just believe, or you still have all these reservations, don't let it be the crack in the sidewalk for you. Don't let it be the move that just keeps on getting you. Open your eyes to it. In the last line of chapter 9, it says this: God warned them of this in the scriptures when he said, I am placing a stone in Jerusalem that makes people stumble, a rock that makes them fall. But anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. But anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. Like I said, I've had to think through the wrestle with a lot of those possible stumbling blocks we just mentioned. But here's what I've learned. You can't shy away from the hard or the uncomfortable or the hard to comprehend stuff. If you just start to shy away from it, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to be farther from God. So you have to learn the move for yourself. Trust that God is big enough. Learn the stumbling block. Go in knowing that God is God and you're not. Therefore, even if it seems like you can't reconcile something, that doesn't mean it's irreconcilable. God is God. We just may not quite get it yet, and someday we will. And as you do this, here's what I found with each of these areas. It's possible, and this is the really helpful part, I think. It's possible to turn a potential stumbling block into a strength of your faith rather than a threat to it. It's possible to turn a potential stumbling block into a strength for your faith rather than a threat to it. I've yet to find a single thing, a single one of those issues where with prayer and research and talking to people that I trust and know and have this significant relationship with God, and trusting that God is God and I'm not, that hasn't led to a strengthening of my faith rather than a weakening of it. Sometimes I don't get the answers that I want, but I get the answers that I need. And in doing that, what I found is every single time I engage the issue rather than let it go and just kind of keep my distance, I end up growing closer to God. I end up trusting him more. I end up being more amazed, quite literally, of who God is, what he's done for me, what he's doing in the world, and how I can be a part of it. It's just what happens. And so I encourage you, if you have one of these things that's just been this sticky piece for you, don't be afraid of it. Know God's big enough and engage it. And what would that look like for you? What would that look like for you in your life? Maybe it's to go in and chat with somebody who you think maybe knows something about that issue. Maybe it's to just start doing some research and finding out what people say. Maybe it's to go to the Bible, which is a great place to start, and researching where it says this or that about the thing. And you can start to engage it in a way that is straight there. Or maybe it's just to pray about it. To say, God, I have this issue. I'm trying to figure out how to forgive this person. I know you say to, but it is just so hard. Why do I have to forgive? What's the deal? Maybe you can start there. And maybe he can start to show you why that's a possibility. What would that look like for you? What faith threat in your life would you love to turn into a strength of your faith? Because I think that could be powerful for you. Now, if you're here tonight and you know someone, and I think we probably all know someone, if you're like Paul and you'd give anything for that person, then know this. As Jesus teaches, he often talks about how our prayers matter. And he likes to give illustrations. There's one illustration he gives where he says that there's a man and he had company come late at night. And at the end of the night, he realizes, oh no, I have company here and I have nothing to feed this person. And so he says this man walks over to his neighbor's house and he begins to knock the door. And even if that neighbor says, go away, I'm asleep, I'm in my nightie, whatever, go away. If you keep knocking, this is what Jesus says will happen. But I tell you this, though he won't do it for friendship's sake, if you keep knocking long enough, he will get up and give you whatever you need because of your shameless persistence. In another place, he says this in Matthew 7:7, keep on asking, and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking, and the door will be open to you. Prayer is powerful. Now, I'm not saying that if you just pray enough, somebody will believe. That's not something that we can do. But I do think that our prayers are so powerful that they might just soften somebody's heart. And so if you're looking for something to do that's tangible, maybe that's an amazing place to start. But it's not just prayer. We did a baby dedication last week, and maybe you were here. And one of the questions that we ask, the only question we ask all of you is, will you live on Wednesday and all the other days of the week like you kind of do here on Sunday when you got your or Saturday, when you got your weekend church face on, right? Will you live that way during the week just like you are here on the weekend? Because that's what people see. And so as you're living this way, I think, and Paul says it in another place, one of the most attractive things in the whole world is a person living following Jesus. There's something about it that's attractive, and people want it. So the two things that you can do if there are people in your life that you want to experience this is number one, pray, and number two, live your life how God would have you live it, which will make your life better, but it also might be the most attractive thing possible. And again, like coaches on the sidelines, it's not something you can do. You can't make the decision for anybody else, but you can most certainly be encouraging. And then know that you have to make the decision for yourself as well. So as we close here, I just have a couple of things that I want to close with praying about. And the first thing is this. What would it look like for you this week to be transformed in such a way where your stumbling block is now a strength of your faith rather than a weakness of it or a threat to it? So we could ask God to help us know what that would look like and a step that we could take in that direction. And then the second thing is that we could live our lives in such a way where people could see that there's something different about us. People could see the fact that we follow Jesus and be wondering what the deal is with it. So as you want those things, if you want to pray for those things, would you pray with me as we close? Dear God, we are just so incredibly grateful that you love us and that you've given us just the most amazing things. God, as we spend tonight thinking of you and looking to you, we ask that you would transform us. Like we've been talking about all throughout Romans, that thing that has been a stumbling block for us, that's tripped us up, that we would dive into it in a way and turn it into a strength rather than a weakness for our faith. That would actually, by engaging it, draw us closer to you, not farther away. Help us to have a big view of you, knowing that you're big enough no matter what. And then also, God, we ask that as we live our lives and as we have people in our lives that we care about and would give so much to see them trust in you, that you would help us to know that our lives can be that attractive thing. That as we live for you and actually experience the ways that you have us live, that in itself is what you have planned. That we can be that light in their lives. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.